We've sold all the flour that we listed online. We just ran a trial, and this is now how much buckwheat flour I have. Obviously, that's not enough to share any more. I need to do some milling so that we have some flour for the bakeries themselves. So I need to get some buckwheat here. Our goal today is to pack up flour for our own bakeries because the online run that we did kind of wiped out everything we had on hand. And so we still have a chance before the holidays. You can see it's a holiday bakery. There's a lot going on. But we have the ability to move some of this flour here in-house for people that are baking at home over the holidays. That being said, we're trying to learn from some of the things that we just did. One, we're testing a slightly smaller paper bag, same amount of flour going inside, just the paper bags that we had, we found to be a little bit too big. 5 pounds of coffee, which is what they're for, is not the same as 5 pounds of flour. So Amanda's currently already stickering the new Rouge Bordeaux bags, and we'll see how those work out. We learned a lot through this first run of shipping out flour. Everything from thoughts on boxes to thoughts on shipping costs, that kind of thing. So I'll give you an update on what we plan on resolving. Flour will be available online in early 2025, as early as we can. We hope to lower the shipping costs by including different carriers. This time around, we wanted to get flour to everybody's door before Christmas, those of you that ordered, that is. And our limitations were to work with the post office that allowed for affordable shipping for people that were nearby, meaning people here in Arizona. A lot of people in Arizona that bought flour this time around, but also shipping costs weren't so bad for like Colorado or Texas or states that are close by. We did have a lot of people that ordered from across the country that found the shipping cost to be prohibitive. Some people ordered anyway. Some people said, that if the shipping costs stayed this high, they wouldn't be able to make it a normal thing. Some people didn't order this time around because of shipping. We do hope to solve that problem by adding UPS as an option now that we won't have the constraint of getting everybody flour right before the holidays. I'm gonna grab the rest of the buckwheat. We're getting the warehouse ready. A lot of the reason that you see things in the state that they are is we're really having to do with milling at volume. And one of the things I hope to resolve is being able to even get some of these cleaned grains that we get organically from central milling in the sacks so that we can put them in the buckhorn containers and load the mill more efficiently that way. That's we're trying to make more of our milling centered around this equipment. By the time that we ship flour again in early 2025, we will hopefully have resolved the issue of shipping prices to whatever extent we can. Keep in mind that just this time around, the 200 bags of flour we listed, well, we shipped out 1 ton of flour. 1 ton is what's in that buckhorn container for reference. That's 1 ton of grain. Well, imagine moving that around regardless. It's even in a bigger format in boxes because the boxes take up space where there's just air in there. So moving that around takes up space on trucks, it takes up space on whatever method of transport it's on, whether it's on a train, a plane, or a truck. And shipping of flour is going to come with a cost. It's not going to be something that's easy to absorb. You'll either see it in the cost of the grain itself on the front end, or you'll see it on the back end in the cost of actual shipping. We find it to be more transparent to just charge you the shipping costs rather than to pretend like it's not there by charging more than we need to on the grain itself. So that's something that you should just be aware of, that we as a bakery too have to pay a lot in shipping just to get grains and flour here. When we get final flour here, a big portion of the cost is the shipping, because it weighs a lot compared to other things. It's not something that you can just put in an envelope and put a stamp on it and call it a day. It really takes up meaningful amounts of space on trucks. So I'm going to go ahead and load the mill now with the buckwheat. I'm going to turn the mill on. With this kind of flour, you're either building a gluten-free bread, or you're adding it to a regular bread as another grain that packs a pretty powerful flavor. Buckwheat's got a very distinctive taste to it, and so you can use it strategically in a number of ways. Buckwheat on its own doesn't like to absorb a lot of water. So if you just put buckwheat flour and water together, you're not going to be able to put that much water in versus the buckwheat itself. Things I can do to help you with that is, we'll first suggest boiling water, a scald method, and get a lot more water in that way. But also I can mill it as fine as possible. The finer the mill, the more water you can add to the flour. Generally, if you're working with a bunch of particulates in the air, which milling does, we're just doing our best to protect our team's lungs over the long term. Because baker's lung is a real thing, and particulates are particularly harmful. So we are going to err on the side of caution. I'll leave mine off today, but as a regular practice, if I'm milling, I'm wearing a mask. It's just I want it to be possible for you guys to understand what we're talking about today as well. So that being said, I am ready to configure the buckwheat. So I've got all of my grains loaded in the mill. So I'm going to turn on the auger. And my mill's currently in the 0 position, so the stones are distanced apart. I'm going to give it 1 revolution and then a 1/4 turn as a starting point. And as this flour dispenses, I'm going to dial it in now and find the right level. It's actually already pretty solid. You can tell that the stones are closer together now. You can kind of hear it as I go a little more. I'm smelling also, making sure that I'm not smelling the particular smell that it is when stone and stone rub together. That would be too aggressive. You're then polishing your stone. You don't want that. What I'm looking for is, as I put the flour in my palm and try to work it in, that the flour stays in the smallest crevices of my skin. That's how I know that I've achieved a really fine flour. I'm also feeling for grit. So generally speaking, this buckwheat flour is already at a very good range. I can turn off my grain elevator now, since I've got all the grain already up there. And now I just have to sort of monitor this over the course of the next hour. Every once in a while, I've got to come by and knock this bin, because what will happen is that the grain on the inside, as it turns into flour, it will actually pile up in a cone and backfill the chute eventually, backfilling the mill. So you don't want that as you're filling this bin. Right now I have that distinctive smell in the air of stone on stone, and it's because I did put the mill too close together for a moment, and I did back it off a little. So for buckwheat, it's 1 revolution plus a 1/4, which is 90 degrees. And so I would then notate that this is 90 degrees of milling. We typically put the 1 revolution in. That's like an extra turn that we do on the end of milling to make sure the stones aren't touching when we activate the mill. but 90 degrees is all we need for the buckwheat flour. So I'll put this knife here for now. I'll need it again. We're going to mill the buckwheat all the way and then work our way through all the different grains that we're selling online, and be excited to do this again. What my hope is from this project is that people start using our flour on a regular basis, baking at home, and get to the point that they're purchasing it on a regular interval, you know, whether that be monthly or whatever's right for a particular baker. So this is something that we hope to make a big part of our future. It's why we invested in this mill when we did. And now we've been milling for nearly 2 years. It'll be 2 years this summer since we activated the mill. The first year and a half to this point was really learning how to mill for ourselves and make sure that the flour that we mill is useful in baking. And you can rest assured that everything that we're milling has been thoroughly tested across thousands and thousands and thousands of our own loaves of bread that we've made with this flour. So we're sharing it after all of that kind of initial work now with you all, and excited to see where this project goes. So after buckwheat, we'll start working our way through the grains. I have quite a bit of rye, so this won't be a major focus for me today. I might do a bag or two. I'll definitely need more Rouge de Bordeaux, which is our sifted grain. That one will run through the sifting box when we get there. This has been the most popular seller online so far by a large margin. It also makes me happy that I guess I guessed right when I ordered my first field of wheat to be grown as Rouge de Bordeaux, because we committed to 40 acres of this grain. So I'm glad you guys like it the most because I have the most of it to mill. So currently I'm getting a little bit of a doming effect. There's still a lot of room to play in this barrel, but I'll just give it a quick kick, and that allows the new flour to settle flat. And that way I don't end up backfeeding the mill. I'm just gonna do a quick check of the flour. It's super fine. You can't mill whole grain flour any more fine than this. That mirror lets me check how much grain is left, and what I'm really just trying to prevent is overheating the flour. This is my first mill of the day, so I also checked kind of the temperature of this flour as I had it in my hand. It's not a concerning temperature, but it was starting to get hot. I might back off on the milling for a while and let the stones cool down. So that's not going to be a problem until much later in the morning. So we'll let this keep going for a little while now that I've periodically checked in. It's easiest to score your loaves when they're cold. We eat with our eyes first.
You have to understand your audience enough to be able to say, like, I'm going to be charging a lot of money for my super crazy cool thing, or it's so cool and so creative that only you can do it, and then you don't stand a chance of scaling it.
Let's go over what it's like to build a bakery from one person to many. So looking at the mill, it's about time to reload. The buckwheat's about to run out, and at this point I need to be careful to make sure that the stones don't rub together. So I'm watching the mirror at this point because I know once it gets to this level, it's a matter of seconds, not even minutes. And as soon as the grain runs out, I'll unwind the stones. I'll bring this freshly milled flour to Amanda, who will immediately start bagging this flour for our retail customers here in the bakery. Soon, this will be available again for our online customers. But this is how small our supply chain is, just from the mill directly into bags, then hopefully directly in a box and on its way to you. So stay tuned. We'll definitely post another video as we launch our flour orders again. The last bit of grain going in. See, the auger is going to stop dispensing grain momentarily. And that's my cue. So I'll bring the stones apart. They didn't ever rub together here. Dusty here for a moment. I'm gonna move towards Rouge Bordeaux, which means I'm gonna use the sifting box now This is an empty bin, which is great. I haven't milled this flour in a while, so I need to dial it in before I actually send it to the sifter. So by dialing it in, I'm gonna get the finest sifted flour, which is what, as a customer, I would want. On this side of the mill, I've got a lot helping me. These screens work in a way that the grain is fed from the mill all the way down the line, and the flour that we're retailing, that we're calling sifted Rouge Bordeaux, is only the flour coming in this first bin. It's the finest flour that the mill generates, whereas all of the middlings, meaning the 15% or so rough material of a flour, ends up in bin 4, and this stuff's really rough. So this is what we're extracting from each grain of Rouge Bordeaux when we're milling. I'm also still filling the mill, so I'm watching it fill and making sure I'm not going over. This has been our most popular flour, the sifted Rouge. Right now I'm milling a little bit of whole wheat Rouge, but mostly just to dial it in. So I still feel a little bit of grit, which means that I'm gonna dial it in a little further. I don't smell anything negative right now. I want to get kind of to the same level that I got with that buckwheat, where it was just as smooth as I could imagine it coming out this way. I can also tell how much more I'm having to bring the stones together than when I first installed the mill. And that means that something that's coming up in our near-term future is our first dressing of the stone. It's going to be an eventful day. We're going to have to pick up the top stone and then basically rough up the two stones with a special tool because they get more polished over time. The millstones will outlive me, the miller, for sure, but they do need maintenance from time to time. And it's a big job with a mill like this. It's going to be an all-day affair. Okay, I'm getting closer to the level that I'm expecting. Still not noticing any negative smells, so I just cranked it down a little bit more. And now I'm pretty happy with it. And so what I'm going to do is send it through to the sifting box. So now the Rouge Bordeaux will come out in its finest setting yet in this bin. And that's what's going to go into the final flour bag. So this particular flour is the best for a base bread flour that we have. It's the closest thing to a base bread flour that we have. You can absolutely make a 100% Rouge Bordeaux loaf. It will be definitely a dark loaf, but Rouge Bordeaux has been selected for bread making for hundreds of years. It is an ancient grain because it's pre-industrial. So we're talking about records dating all the way back to the 1600s in France. And prior to that, there weren't very good agricultural records, so we don't know how much earlier than that this grain was used. But it's been a very popular flour for a long time, and it's because it has good baking characteristics. Okay, so the flour that I'm getting on this end is super fine. There's really no grit whatsoever. It's really nice. This is the closest thing to a type 85 flour. It's not all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour would be typically low-protein flour that isn't as well suited for bread baking. Our white Sonora, if we sifted it, would probably be the closest thing to an all-purpose flour that we have on our menu. But typically all-purpose flour just is named that way because of its difference in protein content, where it's not as high of a protein content as bread flour, but it's not so low as to completely lack all-purpose in bread making. You can use it in breads, but it's better to be used as a portion of a bread recipe than the only bread recipe. Typically, you need a little bit more protein content. We still have to get our flours tested for the exact protein level that's in them. However, we can tell you, for the most part, that Rouge Bordeaux has a lot of protein, so a higher protein content, 12 plus. White Sonora, lower protein content, probably closer to 8. The Coruscant, Buckwheat, and rye are less useful to understand the protein percentages. You're not really using them in that kind of a way. They're typically used as an addition to a recipe. So I don't think it'll be nice to have those numbers, but from the perspective of our customers, they should know if they're looking for a high protein flour, buy the sifted Rouge. That's going to give you the best baking results for bread. The fact that it's type 85 means some of the bigger particulates of bran that I showed you in that middling spin have been removed, which means as you build your doughs, the gluten will actually come together more easily and form a tighter bond, whereas oftentimes the bran actually will have kind of a tearing effect on the gluten strands. So that's the benefit of the sifted flour versus the flour that comes into this particular barrel, which whole in, whole out. Whereas here it's whole in, and you get portions in each of these bins, with the finest of the fine coming through this first bin here that we're milling. So I'm excited about this batch. Should make a nice new batch of Rouge. All right, I'll let this go for a little while, check on other things.